Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. If you've been here for a while, you know that I really like putting my kitchen to bed each night, but it has become really hard to do when this is where I start from so many days. My daughter Annie has been on dishes this week and she goes to school, and so it's tough for her to keep up, and we do help her a lot throughout the day, but it's time to whip this kitchen back into shape. However, I found on this particular day that as I got started cleaning the kitchen, I also realized that there were multiple tasks that needed to be done before I could even fully clean up areas of the kitchen. So one example would be all of this beef broth. It's really pale. I probably should have let it go for a good bit longer, but it is quite gelatinous because we used our big soup bones from when we processed our beef cow back at the beginning of February. So I think it's very nutritious, but I am filling my Presto cheap pressure canner, and we will process these at 25 minutes at 10 pounds pressure. And then I will be able to store them on the pantry shelf. I have 3 more quarts to do after this load, and I actually ended up sticking them in the fridge for 2 days and processing those last 3 quarts a couple days later. Now it is time to actually tackle the kitchen. I really like starting with one surface area at a time, so I might clear off the island first and then just kind of work my way toward the sink last, so that finishing up dishes and everything is the last thing that I do, and then of course spraying off the counters. I felt like a chicken with my head cut off as I was trying to do the kitchen this day, because every time, there was maybe 5 minutes between each of these interruptions that I'd realize, I need to quit. I need to stop and also do fill in the blank. So I realized what time it was, and I don't remember what time it was at this point, maybe 12:30, that I needed to get our pork tenderloin going in the sous vide. So I'm getting that set up first. I just use my large cooking pot, and I usually set either a drying mat or a dish towel under it. I also always start with hot water in my pot, just hot water from the tap, but that helps your sous vide come up to temperature faster. The temperature that I set it at for the pork tenderloin is, if it's going to be going for at least 4 hours, I set it at 135. The amazing thing about the sous vide, if you're not familiar with it, is it's unlike any other cooking method because, first of all, your food is not going directly in the water. You're putting it in a bag of some sort, which I know is not ideal when it comes to plastics and all of that, but I'm not willing to give this process up a couple times a month. So the sous vide appliance itself holds the water at whatever temperature you're wanting it to be at. So, for example, if you're cooking something on the stove or in a crock pot or instant pot, it is impossible to hold a temperature at hold that food or that liquid at an exact temperature. It's going to fluctuate, but the sous vide holds it, and so it's impossible to overcook something with the sous vide. So it'll hold this pork, it'll get it up to 135 and then hold it there for as long as you want. I could do it all day, 8-10 hours. I've never gone that long. I think the longest probably is maybe 6 hours, but usually my goal is about 4 with the pork tenderloin. And then we will sear it in a really hot skillet on all sides for just a couple minutes each side before letting it rest for 5 to 10 minutes and then slicing it up. And it is one of our very favorite dinners, and it is so simple. This Kinder seasoning that I used on the pork tenderloin this time around is called Buttery Steak, and it is one of our favorites. It's really, really good. Just really good flavor, just the right amount of salt. I always like to try the new Kinder seasonings that come out at Sam's or Costco. So this particular day was a Thursday, and Thursdays are my absolute busiest days of the week, and I am go from the time I get up in the morning until I get home around 8:30 that night, just because of different errands and jobs that I have on Thursdays. So it was perfect to get this in the sous vide around 1 o'clock, knowing it would be finished at 5, and one of my teenage daughters could finish it off for me with the skillet and everything. And we just served it with roasted Brussels sprouts, which I think maybe is later in this video, but I just went ahead and did those early and then turned the oven off, let it cool for a bit, stuck the Brussels sprouts back in there to keep warm, and everything was ready for them to eat by 6. So the sous vide is wonderful, and it's just kind of a step up from something like the crock pot. Now I need to strain off my kefir grains. I've been making milk kefir for about a week thanks to a friend who gave me some of her kefir grains. Milk kefir and water kefir they're fermented beverages. So similarly to sauerkraut or kombucha, it's just one more fermented thing that you can add to your diet. My family does like kombucha. I haven't brewed it in a long time, and I don't feel like I have the margin in my life to do it right now. I also do not do sourdough. I have done it off and on. I have my very favorite sandwich recipe for sourdough is Kate at Venison for Dinner. She has a Kate soft sourdough sandwich bread or something like that. I can try to link it below, but that was a huge success and delicious. But I just really like my freshly ground wheat and kamut bread, and it's nice and easy, and I don't have to babysit it in any way, shape, or form. I'm not feeding anything. So anyway, I feel like the kefir grains, the milk kefir is similar to that. It's got lots of beneficial gut bacteria. I don't have to really babysit it at all. I just do this quart jar every day. You could see when I strained it in this strainer, the whole strainer was full, but then I used the spoon to kind of stir everything around, and eventually all of the kefir strained off into the bowl, and what's left are the kefir grains. I'm going to put them in a fresh jar and then top it off with more of our raw milk, and it'll sit out on the counter for 24 hours until we're ready to do the whole process over again. And what I'm pouring into this jar now is the product. It is the milk kefir. It's kind of a cross between milk and yogurt, but there's a teeny bit of like effervescence to it. My husband took a big swig of it. I do not drink it plain. I add it to smoothies for the kids and I. But he took a big swig of it and said it almost like felt effervescent on his tongue, like kombucha. And so I thought that was interesting. I'm not brave when it comes to food and drink. And so I love that we can add some fermented beverages to our daily diet by smoothies, and the kids don't, because we're adding fruit or berries or whatever, they don't notice a difference and have not complained at all, but they're getting that good gut healthy probiotics and stuff from the fermented milk. All right, time to tackle the dishes. I realized after the fact that I'm stacking this serving tray and this cookie sheet right in the way. It's blocking half the camera, so sorry about that. But I mean, how fun is it really to watch somebody wash the dishes? It's so funny because I've had this cast iron Dutch oven for years, like 7 or 8 years. And for the most part, it sits in the Lazy Susan in my kitchen unused. And then all of a sudden, I have been making recipes that has called for using a Dutch oven. So I've been using it. Now I'm putting 2 chicken breasts. That's it. That's all I had in my freezer. 2 chicken breasts along with a cup of water in my Instant Pot. So I can use that to make a small batch of chicken salad that we can have for lunch, maybe tomorrow. So I had this on like an hour and a half or 2 for beef stock, so I had to bring it down to 20 minutes, high pressure. Now, I roasted coffee yesterday, and I never did sift out the chaff, and so I'm taking these coffee beans out. You can't see it in this video, the sun was so bright, but I basically just gently toss them, and there's always a bit of a breeze because our house is up on a hill, and it blows the chaff out from, separates it from my coffee beans. And now I am going to put it into our jar for the week. We go through about 1.5 pounds of coffee a week, sometimes not quite that much. And I just store it in a 1/2-gallon jar right next to the coffee pot. For about 4 years, I have been using a Nespresso coffee maker right here on the right, and I have loved my Nespresso pods, but they're expensive. And I finally got back in the habit of roasting our beans again, and I decided to invest in this Cuisinart coffee pot that grinds your beans fresh every morning automatically. You can program it to start, and there's nothing like that. Is my alarm in the morning at 6 o'clock or 5:45. I can hear the click, and it starts to grind the beans for me, and then I can start to smell the coffee brewing, and oh my goodness, it was worth every penny. I think that pot was $120, but it was an absolute worthy investment, especially since we roast our own beans. Nothing compares as far as coffee to freshly roasted, freshly ground coffee every morning. It's amazing. I'll put the link to that down below if you're interested. Okay, this footage is from the next day, but I wanted to share this recipe with you, and the video otherwise wasn't very long. So I decided to make stuffed French loaf. The actual recipe, it's an old Southern Living recipe that was called sausage stuffed French loaf, and I believe it called for half ground beef, half ground sausage, but all I had was ground beef, so that's what I decided to use. And then I am making my regular whole wheat bread, except I'm adding about half the honey, and I decided to add some Italian seasoning also. I don't normally add that unless I'm making maybe pizza crust, but I didn't want this to be a sweeter like sandwich bread like we normally make, because it is a very salty, savory dish. So I am making my bread first, and what I'm going to do is I'm using the same recipe that I would usually make 2 sandwich loaves with, except instead of putting them in sandwich loaf pans, I'm going to kind of roll them out and shape them into 2 quote unquote French loaves. They're totally not French loaves. They're just massive, like Italian loaves, basically. As I'm waiting for the dough to sponge, I am going to make some chocolate milk because the fridge was overflowing with fresh milk, and we absolutely love homemade chocolate milk. You just use a 1/4 cup of sugar and a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder for each half-gallon jar. So it's really not a lot of sugar. It's a 1/2 cup of sugar for an entire gallon of chocolate milk. That's not bad at all. And then this is high quality, organic, fair trade cocoa powder. And oh my goodness, it does not compare to the inexpensive stuff, or even like, just Hershey's cocoa powder that you would buy from the grocery store. And then a pinch of salt for each half-gallon. And after I have boiled the water and mixed all of that together well, I add a generous splash of vanilla. But first, I am removing some of the heavy cream from the top of these jars. Otherwise, I end up with these lovely floaty chunks of heavy cream, because when raw milk separates and the cream is at the top and it's been sitting for a day or 2 or 3, really not necessarily one day, but after about the 24-hour mark, it becomes so thick you could just about pick it up with your bare hand. And it's just not great for adding to our chocolate milk. So I might as well skim it off. We can use it in our coffee or even to make butter or whipped cream. That would have been yummy also. But something I did not know until this year, when you skim the cream off of raw milk, what you are left with, and it's pretty near impossible to get all of it without a chemical, like a mechanical cream separator. What you're left with, I would think, would be like skim milk. That's totally not the case. When you've skimmed the cream manually off of raw milk, what you are left with is more like store-bought whole milk. So I thought that was really interesting, which basically means when we don't skim the cream off of our raw milk, particularly when it's fresh and it hasn't separated yet, what we're drinking is closer to half and half. Especially in the spring and summer when the cows are out on fresh grass and they are just having the time of their lives, and we are getting jars of milk that are quite literally half cream, half milk. That is definitely what half and half is. What I do when I am making a gallon or 2 of these half-gallon jars of chocolate milk, I put the sugar and cocoa powder and salt in a quart jar, pour maybe a 1/4 to a 1/2 cup of boiling water into that jar, shake it up really well, or maybe even use the immersion blender, add the vanilla, and then evenly split it among 2 jars, and then shake it up, and it's good to go, and it is so good. All right, the bread dough is looking perfect. It's time to add the salt and melted butter, and I think this is where I added the Italian seasoning, and then my whole wheat flour until it pulls away from the sides. While it is kneading, I go ahead and drizzle just a tiny bit of avocado oil into the bowl, just so that it helps the dough not stick too terribly to the sides while it is rising. I put this in the bottom of my KitchenAid double oven, which has a bread proof setting, and I did find out that bread proof temperature in an oven like that is around 75 to 80 degrees. So that's really good to know. Now I am taking some homemade mozzarella out of the freezer and I am going to shred that, and it's going to be used, I'm going to use the whole block. I'm not following a recipe for this stuffed French loaf because I've made it so many times for about 11 years that I'm just going to wing it. And I will let you know later how that backfired so badly. One habit I would highly suggest cultivating if you do not do this already, because it is one of the most beneficial things in my life right now in this busy season that I'm in. When things need to be done and you have stuff out, go ahead and do it. So for example, this jar that I keep in the cabinet for our organic, unbleached, all-purpose flour, which I use pretty regularly, I already had it out because I use a few cups at the beginning of my whole wheat recipe. And I decided, I need to go ahead and refill the jar right now. It would have been quick and easy to put the jar quickly back in the cabinet and run the flour back to the pantry. And then when I would have needed this flour, let's say tomorrow, I would have had to then go get the flour again, get this jar down, refill the jar, use the flour that I need, just like why not take that extra 60 seconds to do it right now? Our dough has risen. It smells amazing. Now I'm going to punch it down and dump it out on a sprayed counter and then divide it in half and shape it into my 2 big long loaves. I never really consider this like an extra kneading process for the bread that I make. The only reason that I'm doing any kneading at this point, and it's just for, maybe 30 to 60 seconds per loaf, is because you want to work out any air bubbles that have formed as it has risen, because that's what the whole rising process is. And if you leave those air bubbles in there, then you will end up with holes throughout your bread. And that has certainly happened before too, which is another reason it's important not to let dough over rise when it's in its second rise. So that's what this will be. This will do a second rise in the bottom oven on the bread proof setting before I let it bake. And if you let it rise for too long, then you will end up with these big old air pockets, and you'll have holy bread. Not that kind of holy. I used a dull paring knife to score these loaves, and now it is time to let them rise again. I am going to go ahead and start to attempt to shred my homemade mozzarella. And let me tell you, I've learned the hard way that I don't know what it is about my homemade mozzarella that it's like it ends up solidifying in like layers. So you could almost peel it up like you would string cheese, except instead of being like in a log, it's in this flat rectangle. But it's really challenging to shred, and I think it would be worth it if I would just get out my KitchenAid mixer shredder attachment. I've never found that it was worth it to do that because it's such a mess, and then you have to take it apart and clean it. But you can see that this is just a mess. First of all, it's still partially frozen, but as I'm shredding it, it's wanting to come up in layers rather than, look at this. It's like the sad sole of a shoe. So what I end up doing later, after wasting way too much time trying to shred this block that doesn't want to be shredded, I end up breaking it into chunks and sticking it in my Vitamix, and I just processed it in the blender. Not for very long, or I probably would have ended up with a soupy mess, but it was perfect, and that's what I added to the bowl. I am adding my cheeses to the bowl first. So this was the mozzarella, and now I'm going to shred up some Parmesan. You can see I am reaching the end of this block of Parmesan. I am pretty much just grinding up the rind. I love fresh Parmesan. One thing I love about how I've simplified my grocery shopping every month, and how much we have moved to almost exclusively whole foods, is I'm just buying the same things every month and using it in different ways, or using it in the same way. So I ended up with about a cup of Parmesan, but one block of Parmesan always goes on my list. Parmesan is a very hard cheese, and it lasts for a long time in the refrigerator, particularly if I don't end up having to open a new block from the month for maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the month because we haven't used up the one from the previous month. And this is where things go terribly wrong. If you have been following for a while, you know that I stared into that container for way too long. I really like to use what I have. I like to clean out my fridge and not let anything go to waste. Well, my mother-in-law had made a gorgeous salad for the 10-year homecoming anniversary for our adopted girls a few weeks ago. And two things that she kind of set on the side for people to add to their salad if they'd like was feta cheese and blue cheese. Well, not many people care for blue cheese, but I thought, we've got this whole container. I'll just add it in with my cheese mixture. No one will even be able to tell, and then we'll be using up this blue cheese. Like, I'd hate for it to go to waste. So I'd also added 2 eggs to this mixture because it just helps hold everything together and kind of bind it once you've added all the rest of the ingredients. So even as I'm stirring here, I am questioning, should I pull out some of these chunks of blue cheese? So I'm like trying to kind of break them up. I'm stirring it. I mean, I could smell it, but anyways, we press on. I added the blue cheese. It was probably close to a full cup of blue cheese. Now it is time to cook the beef. So I think I've mentioned before in previous videos that our butcher packaged our ground beef in 2-pound vacuum sealed packages. That is so perfect for our family. If we do 1/4 pound hamburgers, then we end up with 8 per package, and that's perfect. Of course, that doesn't leave leftovers for anyone, but we don't usually do 1/4 pound. We do maybe a little bit less. So it really ends up being perfect. And the fact that he packaged them in these like kind of flatter rectangles helps them. I'm able to defrost them in like room temperature water from frozen to ready to cook in about 20 or 30 minutes. It's been fantastic. We'll never do it any differently moving forward. So I'm going to brown up this ground beef, and I think all I end up adding is a little bit of garlic and onion powder and salt and pepper, and then I set it aside to cool a bit before I add it to my cheese mixture. Our loaves have risen, and it is time to put them in the top oven at 350 and let them bake for about 25 minutes. Now I am going to saute some onions on a really low heat until they're soft and have sweetened up. Not quite caramelized, but I am going to let them get nice and soft because I'm going to add this whole onion to our beef and cheese mixture for the filling of this sandwich. And I will say I ended up cutting out the whole onion slicing part of the video because I went through 3 onions before I found one that was not brown and mushy on the inside. I think I had purchased like 20 pounds of white onions several months ago, and they lasted a good long time in a basket in my pantry. But this was actually the final onion, and it's perfect because we're at the end of March, and I will add probably 20 more pounds of onions to my grocery list, and hopefully that will get us until the onions that are in my greenhouse right now are bulbed up and ready to be harvested. The onions and ground beef have cooled, so it's time to mix everything together, and then I am going to slice the tops off of my loaves and start to pick out some of the center of the loaf so that it makes room for all of this filling. The loaves turned out perfectly. Oh man, my kitchen smells so good. When is YouTube going to activate the smell-o-vision feature? Okay, one thing that did not cool yet, the loaves. This was so hot. My fingertips were on fire. I'm like trying to figure out how am I going to get this out of here without burning my hands. I keep switching hands. It was so hot. And my kids were coming in. I was making a pile of the bread that I'm picking out from the center. And my kids were coming in and swiping these chunks and smearing a little bit of butter on them. It was so good. But oh my word, it was hot. Would definitely be beneficial to make the bread a little more ahead of time next time so it actually has adequate time to cool. One thing I did not do this time, just kind of completely winging the recipe compared to following the original recipe. In the original recipe, it has you take a few cups, and maybe just 1 cup, I don't know, some of the bread that you have pulled out from the center after it has cooled and dried a bit, and run it through a food processor so that it kind of turns it into homemade breadcrumbs, and add that to your mixture, your meat and cheese mixture. I decided not to do that. I don't need extra bread added. I had plenty of filling. Another thing that the original recipe calls for that I forgot, and it would not have saved the recipe because the blue cheese just completely ruined it. But you add a little bit of Dijon mustard as well. Stone ground would be delicious too, but I didn't add either of those. And again, it wouldn't have made a difference because the blue cheese was so overpowering. But now I'm going to do the second loaf, and it'll be ready to go in the oven after I brush it with garlic butter. Now for the best part, and I would highly suggest you never ever skip this part. I melted a full stick of butter in a hot skillet and added some minced garlic, and I let that sit for quite a while. I mean, obviously it's still melty. It hadn't started to solidify, but I did let it sit for a while so that the butter and garlic kind of melded together. And then you brush the entire outside, like the top and the sides of the sandwiches, with this butter. I can't remember if I ended up drizzling more of it over the top at the end. I don't think I did, because I ended up pouring the rest into a jar and I used it the next day. We don't ever let butter go to waste in this house. Now I am going to lightly cover it with foil and bake it at 400 degrees for about 20 to 25 minutes until the filling is nice and hot and melty. The sandwiches turned out lovely. They were beautiful. Meaty, melty. There was plenty of stuffing, but the blue cheese ruined the filling. My kids were not a huge fan, and I really regret it. They did not go to waste, but I will never, ever add blue cheese to anything again. Learn it from me. Thanks for watching.